So hopefully everybody got papers when you came in, right? Everybody got papers. These are a new set of papers. It's kind of a hefty set of papers. We're going to be in this for a little while. And then we'll have another not so hefty set of papers that will follow up on this. What we're talking about this morning, and probably Wednesday, and possibly next Sunday, is how we got the Bible. Okay? We're going to follow up with that with another topic that is really kind of a part of that topic about the Bible. And the reason we're doing this, we've talked about evidences for the existence of God. We've talked about evidences for Jesus. But we have to talk about evidences for the Bible. Okay? Because all that we've talked about, for the most part, about the existence of God and about who Jesus is, comes from the Scriptures. Well, the other thing that we have to deal with in looking at evidences are the Scriptures. Okay? Because a lot of folks out there will tell you that the Bible is just like any other book. Okay? It's no different than any of the other religious books out there, or they might just say it's no different than any of the other books out there. So, because of that, and because our faith is based on evidence that is presented in the Scriptures, we need to talk about why it is we can trust the Bible. And in order to do that, we need to talk about how we got the Bible. Okay? Because everybody hold up your Bibles. What have you got? Modern technology. We've got phones and tablets and printed Bibles and all sorts of things. How in the world did we get that? I got to tell you, the fact that you can carry your Bible with you in your purse, the fact that you can carry it in your pocket now with phones, is an incredible development. And it's not just the phones. It's even a printed Codex Bible that you can get. And if you can go to Walmart, if you lose your Bible and you go to Walmart, you can get a King James for sure, and probably a New International Version, and you won't pay very much for it, a few bucks. Less than a coffee at Starbucks, probably, for a Bible. Okay? It's very widespread, it's very compact, it's easy to have. And if you got a phone, you don't even need to go to Walmart, because you can probably put an app on your phone. There's lots of free apps out there, and carry it right on your phone. More than that, I'm looking over here at Tom with his telephone. He's probably got several translations on his phone. My iPad, I have Bible software that actually has a lot of reference books as well. So that's really kind of incredible that we have that today. We are really blessed by that, because that has not always been the case. Bibles have historically been much more difficult to get and much more expensive to have. Okay? And so we're going to spend some time talking about how we got the Bible, how it is that we get from where things were at the beginning to where things are today. So, two important topics, again, that we need to talk about. This topic and the following topic are important for any discussion of evidences, because so much is based on the Scriptures. Okay? And so we need to understand how we can trust the Bible or not. So we get the attacks of skeptics. Bible has been altered or changed. How many of you have heard that? I have. Okay? I suspect you have as well. The Bible has been changed. Okay? Not always from atheists. Okay? Our Mormon friends will tell us that the Bible has been changed. That's why you have the Book of Mormon, because it corrects those changes. Okay? The Bible is filled with contradictions. How many of you have heard that? You probably have, because one of the things that I deal with fairly frequently in Q&A lessons is member A or member B is reading through the Bible and they see something and they're thinking about it, and they say, well, how does that fit with this over here? And so, how do we resolve that apparent contradiction? Well, the atheist doesn't say apparent contradiction, or the non-believer. They just say it's filled with contradictions. Interestingly enough, I will just say this, many times they will make that charge, they will not follow it with a concrete example. However, in today's modern age, we have the internet. And it is really easy on the internet to find pages that are dedicated to pointing out how the Bible contradicts itself. All right? Who owns those pages by and large? Non-believers. Okay? And they put that material out there. So, it used to be the case that in the past people would say, oh, the Bible's filled with contradictions. But then when you'd ask them for a concrete example, they wouldn't have one. That's no longer the case. Nowadays, when they say the Bible is filled with contradictions, they may say, and look at this passage and this passage. All right? We as Christians need to be equipped for dealing with that issue. Okay? And so part of this class, part of these two topics that we're going to look at is going to do just that. These particular attacks reduce faith in the scriptures. They come from the side of atheist non-believers, also Muslims, even Mormons. Okay? So these kinds of attacks, and you might be sitting there saying, well, I never talk with atheists, and I don't know any Muslims, and so I'm never going to have this discussion until the two Mormon elders knock on your door, and then you might. Or until the Jehovah's Witnesses knock on your door, and you might. Okay? Their attack is going to be more geared at what the translation you have says, but it's still an attack nonetheless. So that's why it's important for us to talk about this topic. And again, this is going to take us several classes. We're not in a hurry. Okay? I know it may seem like we're behind. We are not. We are only halfway through the class. Okay? And I'm not anticipating being gone anymore. And so no more vacation for the rest of the quarter. And so I anticipate having no problem whatsoever finishing the material that I've got for y'all. All right. So let's talk a little bit about ancient writing and quote-unquote books. Okay? Writing was invented in Mesopotamia by at least 3200 BC. Now, when I say Mesopotamia, what area of the world am I talking about?
The Chaldees.
Okay, well, that's a city. Can we geographically put it? That's still a city. Can we geographically put it? If I'm looking for Mesopotamia today on the map, I can still find it. Where is it?
Iran.
It's Iraq. Okay, Iraq in the south, Syria in the north. Okay, that's Mesopotamia. So Mesopotamia, that area where we have the rise of ancient civilizations, such as Ur, as Stacy has said, such as Babylon, as Stacy has pointed out, that is the area of Mesopotamia. If you're looking for it today, you got to go to southern Iraq. I wouldn't recommend that. Iraq's a very dangerous place. Don't go to Iraq today. But if you happen to find yourself in Iraq, for whatever reason, I can't imagine why, and you go to the southern part of the country down by the Persian Gulf, that's Mesopotamia. It means the land between the two rivers. What are the two rivers? The Tigris and the Euphrates. Okay, and the Euphrates River starts way up in Syria, actually, maybe even Turkey. Okay, writing is invented here in about 3200 BC. Okay, now people who believe that people have been around for millions of years would tell you that's relatively recent. Those of us who believe the biblical account would understand that 3200 BC is pretty much the dawn of what we find in the Bible. Okay, so it's invented about that time frame. That's when we have the first evidence of writing. That may get pushed back later as we find more evidence because archaeology is an ongoing field of study. This is plus minus 1200 years before Abraham. Of course, Abraham is written about where? Where do we read about Abraham?
Genesis.
In Genesis, okay? So this is about 1200 years before the events of the life of Abraham, but understanding that before Abraham there was what?
Patriarchs.
Yeah, a whole lot of other stuff going on, right? You think about those first 11 chapters. By the way, Genesis divides nicely where? Right at chapter 12. 12 verse 1 starts the story of Abraham. Everything prior to that is those 11 chapters where we have the Tower of Babel and the flood and things like that. All right? So 1200 years before Abraham, it's about 1700 years before Moses. So writing has been around for a very long time. By the time Moses comes on the scene, why is that significant? Who writes Genesis? Moses does, okay? Who writes Exodus? Moses does, okay? So the vast majority of the first 5 books of the Bible are written by Moses. I say the vast majority because one of those books records the death of Moses. Who do you suppose wrote that? Probably Joshua, okay? But the vast majority of the first 5 books are written by Moses. Not far-fetched at all, because by the time Moses comes on the scene, people have been writing for since 3200 BC, 1700 years. Okay? Literacy was as widespread before Moses began to write the oldest books of the Old Testament. This is important because people will say people weren't literate. People were a whole lot more literate in the ancient world than we give them credit for. Okay? We have inscriptions all over the place. You have all these monumental inscriptions in, for example, where was Moses raised?
Egypt.
In Egypt. Why are the pharaohs making all these monumental inscriptions in hieroglyphics?
Retain power, record events.
To record events. That means that people had to be able to read. Okay? Now, it's not true to say that everybody could read and write, because they couldn't. All right? And I'm not even willing to say that the majority of people could read and write. but a lot of people could. Charlotte, do you need a blanket? Okay. A lot of people could read and write, okay? But you know what? It's 2024 America. Is everybody literate in America?
No.
We have a wonderful public education system where people are taught how to read and write, okay? We have a wonderful public education system where people are taught to read and write. If people choose not to take that advantage, that's not the system's fault, okay? And we have had that for a very long time in this country. Why did they establish, does anybody know why our government established public education in America very early on in our history?
People could read the Bible.
Well, they used the Bible as a text. It was because to have a democracy, you have to have a literate society. Okay, and they understood that. And so this was, public schools were founded very early on in our country. And a system was set aside for public schools to be founded. They also recognized that when you have a lot of private religious schools, that's not necessarily going to be conducive to a democracy. Okay? So literacy is widespread in our country, but are there a lot of people that are not literate?
Yes.
There are. Ivana teaches 6th, 7th, and 8th graders who are reading on 2nd and 3rd grade level. Okay? And I will just point this out. That is not the fault of the school system, by and large. That is the fault of what happens at home. Okay? When they're not being read to at home, when mom and dad care nothing about them, when mom and dad say, "Here, little Johnny, have an iPad. Play games and leave me alone." They're not going to be literate. Okay? So, again, even in our society, with all of our possibilities, we have a lot of people that are, quite honestly, someone who's reading on a 2nd grade level is not able to read the ESV Bible. I will tell you that as a preacher, I don't know what the church is going to look like in 30 or 40 years if we have an entire generation of people grow up that cannot read and understand English grammar. It is not too far-fetched of an idea that I, as a preacher, might actually have to teach someone. I won't be alive in 40 years, at least I hope not. It's not 40 years, I'll be 94. I'd like to be gone and in the ground somewhere, okay, by then. No offense to those of you who are in your 90s, okay, I'm just talking about me. It's not too far-fetched to conceive of the possibility of actually having to sit down with someone as we're studying the Bible and explain to them why a sentence means what it means because of the grammar. As we become less and less of a literate society. It's an amazing turn of events here in the United States. But in the ancient world, you had enough people that could read and write so that records were kept. Moses was able to do this, especially in Moses' case, because he's raised in Pharaoh's household. He is among the elite. He's a prince of Egypt, if you will. Literacy should not be at all surprising. As a matter of fact, I suspect Moses did very well with hieroglyphics and probably whatever script Hebrew was being written in at that time. Okay? He would have been multilingual because he can talk to his people, he can talk to the Egyptians as well. Moses is a great guy for God to choose to send back to Egypt, even though Moses is not on board with that particular idea, at least not at the beginning. So you've got a lot of folks that are writing. It's not true to believe that up until about 100 years ago, everybody were Neanderthals living in caves. They were not. Literacy was much more widespread than we often give the ancient world credit. We have probably forgotten a great deal of knowledge that the ancient world knew. Okay? There was a device found under the water in Greece. This is not junk science. Okay? A device found under the water in Greece that was excavated, cleaned up. It's a mechanical device. It looks a little bit like a clock, but it's not a clock. It's a navigational, they believe, a navigational device of some kind. And with all of our intelligence and technology today, we still don't know how it worked. And that's something that they produced not by space aliens, but the ancient Greeks. So we need to cut the ancient world a break and give them a little credit that we're not so smart as we sometimes think we are, Stacy.
Well, and mathematically, you know, in Alhambra, there's this beautiful fountain that they decided they were going to restore.
Okay.
And they took it apart to restore it, and they can't figure out how to put it back together.
Is that like taking an engine apart and you end up with extra parts to it?
And they couldn't figure out how to make it work again.
So they just use PVC.
I just moved it back there. It doesn't work anymore. But it looks real nice.
Need to get on
Okay.
YouTube. Oriental writings, I know it doesn't affect.
I'm sorry, I lost you. I didn't hear the first part.
Oriental writing, how far back does that go? I know it doesn't affect the writing in the Bible, but how about Chinese language?
It's later than this, but it's not a whole lot later. Okay? It's all, what's interesting is that you have, around this time period, you have this incredible explosion of civilization. It's like you go from the world's view, you go from people living in caves to all of a sudden all this technology. I would say that paradigm is what's wrong. The idea that people were living in caves, because we see in the opening chapters of Genesis that there's technology there. Tubal-Cain, he's the one that does things in iron, or is he the one that does the instrumental music? Okay, but there's a lot of stuff being invented. So you see the rise of civilization in China that's about the same time. So it's just,
It would be like the Tower of Babel and stuff.
it's all post Tower of Babel because they're spread and diverse. Interestingly enough, it's not a class on that, and so I don't want to go into it in detail, but there are some Chinese characters, I am told, and I have a couple books about this, there are some Chinese characters that actually reflect biblical stories. Because, I mean, folks in China trace their roots back, like everyone else, to the Tower of Babel. And they created civilizations there. You have civilizations in Mesoamerica as well. So it's all this rise of civilizations, and it's all about the same time. And you've got writing, by the way, in all of those places. But seemingly, it was invented in Mesopotamia first, which would make sense because it's invented there, and then it's taken elsewhere. And with the languages, with every new language, you have to do what? If you're going to write it, you have to have a alphabet. And alphabets are not all the same. The Czech alphabet is not the same as an English alphabet. There's some extra letters in the Czech alphabet to reflect sounds that we don't have in English. And I have no idea how many. I'm looking at Mimi back there. I have no idea how many characters there are in Chinese, but a lot. So thousands. Okay. So
Hawaiian alphabet has 20 letters.
I'm sorry.
Hawaiian alphabet has
The
Hawaiian alphabet has 20 letters.
Okay. Hebrew had 22. We have 26. I get confused because Czech has more, right? Czech has some extra ones in there. So every language is going to have a different alphabet, or they're going to use an alphabet and adapt it. So like, I don't know, some of the Native American languages are written in a Latin alphabet that's been adapted, again, to give them extra characters for their sounds. And the English alphabet's not always been the same, has it? The old English alphabet had some different letters that we no longer have today. So alphabets change. But all of these folks that spread from the Tower of Babel are going to take whatever language it is that God chose to give them at that point in time, and they're going to find ways to write that. But then you also have all this civilization rising at the same time. It's not to say that the civilization in Mesopotamia is superior. It's not. But it's what's relevant to us because it's from here that the Bible comes. Okay? Good question. Good question. And it gave me an opportunity to say something about those characters. Now maybe Mimi is going to say, can you share that book with me? And I'll look at it and see what I think about it. And I will share that book with her because I have wondered often what a native speaker of Chinese would say about those arguments. So when you've got some spare time and you want to read, I'll loan you a couple books.
I love it.
Okay. All right. So let's look at how books were written historically. So we've got some material, what the material was, an example of that, and a Bible reference. Okay. And so I'm not necessarily going to open the Bible references because I think you can do that on your own. You have the references on your paper. But just different. Some are referred to in the Bible, some are not. So we have stone. That's pretty clear, right? You think about inscriptions in Egypt especially because there are a lot of them. So a lot of things being written on stone. A good example out of Mesopotamia is the Hammurabi Stele. We've all studied about this guy in school. What's so special about Hammurabi?
Law codes.
He writes a law code. He writes a law code. First of all, there's two things about that. It's no longer just the word of the king. There's a law that applies to everybody. And it is written. And so you can see the stele itself, the stele, I guess I should say that right. And in that is the law code for the people living in his kingdom. Where is he from? Babylon. Old Babylon. Not the one we read about in the Bible. The one that predates that a long time before that. He writes this so that people can read it. I want you to note that. Because to write something like that when 99% of the people can't read, why would you do that? People could read. Not everybody, maybe not even the majority, but enough people could read that it was worthwhile putting it in stone. We have a Bible reference to writing on stone in Exodus chapter 31 and verse 18. Let's look at that. Exodus 31:18. And he gave to Moses, when he had finished speaking with him on Mount Sinai, the 2 tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone, written with the finger of God. Okay? So very early on here in the book of Exodus, we get a reference to writing on stone. All right. Ink on plaster was another material. So if you had plaster, you could write on that. Where would you often have plaster?
On buildings.
On buildings, okay? In the ancient world, you would have brick houses made out of mud brick or stone or whatever, and you would plaster it on the inside, okay? My old house in the Czech Republic, or our old house in the Czech Republic, was a brick plastered house. It was made out of brick, and then a layer of plaster was put over it. We had plaster on the outside of the house as well. I suppose we could have written on it. I never did. I'm surprised my kids didn't. Anna did that in our old apartment, which, by the way, was also plaster on concrete. So it's really easy to write on plaster. And for those of you who are grandparents who want to make your grandkids happy, take a room of the house, give them some pens, and say, be artistic. Because you can always repaint the room, right? That's what we had to do with your drawing in the Czech Republic. What's the guy's name on Monsters Incorporated with the one eye?
Sully?
Sully.
No.
Mike. She drew a great picture, almost life-size, of Mike on the bedroom wall. It was a good picture, okay? It got painted over. Okay, so ink on plaster. A good example is what's called the Deir Allah inscription. But we also read about this in the Bible, Deuteronomy chapter 27, verses 2 and 3. Again, y'all have the references. I'll let you check those out later. That was a way of writing. You have clay. It would be written on clay. If it was meant to be permanent, the clay would be fired. And then the writing is kept there. If it was not meant to be permanent, the clay would not have been fired, because then you can just rework the clay. Okay? So written on clay, an example of that would be the Ebla tablets. Okay? And by the way, I could write Ebla tablets, these tablets, those tablets, because in Mesopotamia, that was hugely important. And we have literally thousands upon thousands of these clay tablets, some of which are perfectly preserved. And you can see them in museums. As a matter of fact, probably any museum anywhere that you would go to that has any kind of a section on the ancient world is going to have some tablets like this that you can look at.
What did they write about?
Everything. They wrote business records. They wrote legal records. They wrote receipts. If you sold your cow to somebody for such and such amount of money, there'd be a receipt on that. And so as they've uncovered these libraries, they have found tablets that talk about literally everything on those marriage contracts. Okay? Because a man and a woman in the ancient world, when they get married, it's a business transaction, okay? She's expected to bring something to the marriage. And by the way, if the husband then divorces her, she gets to keep that something. So it's written in the contract. Legal rights, okay? But literally everything imaginable. Think about what you write on scraps of paper. What's our modern equivalent of tablets?
Sticky notes.
Sticky notes, okay? You write a sticky note. Sometimes it's important. Sometimes you'll go and you'll see somebody at their desk. They've got all sorts of sticky notes that have been there forever and always. And then some sticky notes, you write them, they're used, and you tear them out and throw away. Okay? So some were meant to be permanent, some were not. The ones we have today are the ones that were fired, because without that, they wouldn't last. Okay? We have an example of this in Ezekiel chapter 4 and verse 1. So these forms are all being used at various times in the Scripture. We have wood on wax. That was another way of writing. This is kind of interesting because we have an equivalent of this. It's not the Etch-a-Sketch. I don't remember what we call these things, but it was a cardboard about yay big. It had wax and you had a sheet, and you could pull the sheet off and write on. What are those things called?
I had to look into my beard and everything.
I don't think anybody has those anymore. I don't think they make them anymore.
I've never heard of it before.
Because we got iPads. What?
I've never heard of that before.
Because you grew up in the Czech Republic. That's why.
Oh.
I never saw them there. I had one when I was a kid growing up. Probably multiple.
I never heard of it.
You never heard of it either. That's because you're too young, Brian. Oh, I'm feeling my age here. That it's all of us older folks that remember this.
I bet Dollar General has some of those.
You think Dollar General has some of those?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Stacy, if you end up at Dollar General, pick one up, because Bryant and Anna have missed out here, and they definitely need these.
Well, actually, the kids need it, but you can play
I
with
would
it.
like one.
We have LCD tablets now.
Yeah, the Etch-a-Sketch is something like that as well. All right, an example of wood and wax. Can't give you one. Why?
It didn't.
Because they're very, very perishable. Okay, it would be a wood board with wax on it. They would write on it, but neither one of those things are going to last very long. Okay, so there isn't one that would be significant. I'm not saying there's not any out there, but not like the tablets. Okay, not like ink on plaster. That's just one example. There are a lot more out there. All right. So also no Bible reference to that. No clear Bible reference to that. All right. So some photographs to share with y'all. This is the Hammurabi Stele. Dates to about 1750 BC. You've got up there. Let's see if I made any notes about this. I might have. Hang on just a second. Yes. Okay. So if you want to see that, you got to go to Paris. Gentlemen, if your wife wants to go to Paris, take her to Paris. Enjoy the city with her. I've never been, but I hear it's wonderful. Enjoy Paris, and while the wife is enjoying the lights and the cafe shops and the nice French bread and all that, you sneak off to the Louvre and see the Hammurabi Stele. She'll probably want to go with you too. But that's where you can find it. So the Louvre in Paris. This is the Babylonian sun god. I'm sorry, he's the god of the sun and justice, and he is with Hammurabi. What do you suppose he's giving him?
The law.
The law, which is all, and I know you can't see the inscription, but it is all here on the body of this stele, and it's, I believe, on the reverse as well. Written in.
That's the Hammurabi code.
That's the code of Hammurabi. Written in cuneiform, which is those funky little wedges and lines.
I don't
Okay.
know how big that is.
I don't know off the top of my head. I'd say about 7 feet. Okay. It's not a little thing. It's not a home version. Okay. It was meant to be a
You
public.
kind of see kind of like behind it. I don't know what you call that.
Well, yeah. There's a some kind of a ledge
Right.
there behind.
So you get some.
Well, you know what? I just think you need to take Linda and go to Paris and go to the Louvre and walk and take your tape measure out. I'm sure those folks won't mind you getting right up close to it and measuring it. Or you can look on Wikipedia.
Oh yeah, there's a picture of it with people next to it for scale.
Okay, and so is it to scale? So how big is it, you think?
Bigger than people are.
Bigger than people are, so maybe 7 feet is not big enough. Okay.
Magic screen.
Magic screen.
You can get them on Amazon.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So magic screen. You can get them on Amazon. I suggest everybody get one, and you can take your sermon notes on the magic screen. And then instead of pulling out the songbooks during the invitation, I'll hear that page come up. It makes a distinct sound as well. All right. So that's the Hammurabi Stele. This is the.
Does the papyrus come under the wood and?
Nope. Papyrus is its own animal. We'll get to that in a minute.
Oh,
Okay.
It's 7 feet 4.5 inches.
7 feet 4.5 inches. So Anna, your picture to scale must be really wonky. Or they got some really short people at the Louvre. 7
Now,
feet.
the
Okay.
primary copy of the text is inscribed on the stele.
Okay.
So I don't know if it was actually, may have even been a little bit taller so that,
Or there may have just been addendums. We're going to add to it, but it's too late to get it on the statue, so we're going to add to it later. Laws grow, don't they?
Yeah.
And so as laws grow, interestingly, and I'm reading a book right now by Neil Gorsuch, not Chief Justice, but Justice on the Supreme Court, and he's talking about that laws in America have grown exponentially. The things that were not illegal in the past, there were no laws about that, now there are, and normal people like us are running afoul of those laws because we don't even know it's illegal. And so it's a book. This is the Deir Allah inscription, and this particular inscription dates to about 800 BC, significant because it mentions Balaam, son of Beor. Who is Balaam, son of Beor?
The man with the donkey that talks.
The man with the talking donkey. That's exactly right. He was that prophet that was called upon to curse Israel, and he doesn't curse Israel. He blesses Israel. He's mentioned in this inscription. So I'm going to throw this out there because we're going to talk about archaeology later in this class, that this is an archaeological find that is significant for biblical studies because we have the mention of somebody outside of the Bible in a text. And any time you have that, that's significant. Okay? So that's this Deir Allah inscription. All right, here are some of those Ebola tablets. They're written in cuneiform. They date to the period 2500 to 2250 BC. And you can see that some of them are very well preserved. Some of them are very small, almost pocket-sized, if you had pockets in that day. But very small, and if you're able to read cuneiform, they're very legible. You have a tablet over here that's larger, and it's missing some pieces. Why is it missing pieces?
Because clay breaks.
Because it was broken. Okay? And they pieced it back together, but there are parts that are missing. And you can't put parts back that are missing. And so they are able to put them together, but they have to leave the gaps. By the way, can I say this? How do they put that together? How do they know that this piece fits this tablet? How many of y'all do a jigsaw puzzle? Do you use the picture as your guide? Oh, I do. I use the picture as my guide. I want to know what the picture's supposed to look like. How many of y'all would... y'all should get an all black jigsaw puzzle. 1,000 pieces. Might last until you're in your 90s. Okay? Before you get that done. You can put things together, but the picture that you're using here is the text. Because you can make sense of sentences. We can do this as well. If I say an English sentence but leave out a word, can you fill in the word? If I say, Anna Adela went to lunch, what word's missing? And you maybe not, you didn't hear me say it, but you filled it in mentally. You're not saying, Anna Adela, who's that? Anna and Adela. So we can put in missing words. That's important for understanding how we got the Bible as well. When you look at a text like this, it's not biblical. It's just an ancient text. And they're able to piece it together not only by the shapes, but remember, that part's missing. So you have to get from here to here. Well, your text is running across there, and maybe right to left, I'm not sure. And so they can see where it would fit. Some of them are in very good shape, like that one there, that's just wonderful. Okay? You can buy reproductions of these. If you have enough money and the desire to do so, you can buy originals. Not of these, okay? But there are literally thousands of these clay tablets out there, and they're always finding new ones. Anytime they excavate, especially in Mesopotamia, they find things like this. So just if you're looking to buy an original, just buy it to somebody reputable because there are lots of fakes out there as well. Isn't eBay great?
Yeah.
All right, this is a clay tablet in Linear B script. This was recovered at Eclaina, Greece. It dates 1450 to 1350 BC, so it's got about 100 year time frame. What's significant about that is our alphabet is tied to these alphabets. Their alphabet is tied to the Semitic alphabet. Linear B, it's one of those script alphabets. Okay, and so in Egypt, when you have hieroglyphics, are they script? They're pictographic. Okay, so it's a very different kind of writing, and that's why you have thousands of hieroglyphs as well. Script is important because it's easier to learn 20 letters than 4,000, right? Or however many it is in the Chinese alphabet. So this is a clay tablet, very, very old. This is a depiction of writing on a wax tablet. It dates from Greece about 500 BC, and it looks an awful lot like he's got a what?
A laptop.
It looks like he's got a laptop,
Ancient
okay?
aliens
See, laptops existed even in the ancient world, and we had to rediscover them. Now, that's a wax tablet that he's writing on with a, nothing changes. What is that?
A stylus.
And it's called a stylus. Okay? That's what it's called. Okay? It is the ancient equivalent of my Apple Pencil. All right? So he's writing on that clay tablet, and when he's done writing, by the way, I don't know for a fact, but I can imagine this kind of a scene in a school. Where you write your exercises, and then what do?
Erase.
You erase them. How do you erase a wax tablet?
Melted.
You melt the wax. You heat it up. Okay? And then you got a clean surface again, just like that. What was that thing called again? The
Magic. So.
Magic?
That was like 5 minutes ago.
It was 5 minutes ago. The magic, whatever it was, okay? That all of y'all are going to want for taking sermon notes. Okay. So writing on wax tablets. All right, let me move this back down to that way. All right, so some more examples. Metal. Things could be written on metal. So we have the Ketef Hinnom scrolls. Well, Exodus chapter 28, verse 36 talks about writing on tablets as well. We'll get back to the scrolls in a minute. Okay? So you could write on metal. Not very common, but permanent if it doesn't rust. Okay? You have ostraka. What are ostraka? Anybody know? I have this beautiful terracotta vase. My wife bought it at the Greek Walmart. Brought it home, we used it for a while, and then I dropped it.
Oh.
And it shattered into about 5 or 6 different pieces of clay. Well, that's a shame to throw that away, because now my terracotta vase has become a pile of sticky notes. Okay? And so I can write things on there, and people did. So ostraka are just pieces of pottery of various kinds that had broken, and they used them then for writing. We have an example in the Lakish letters. We'll talk about those in a minute. We don't have a Bible reference to this, but they were undoubtedly used. The reason I know they were used is because the Lakish letters come from ancient Judea. And that's what they were using, to send notes to other people. All right. We have papyrus. Lynn, that was your question. We have papyrus. Papyrus numerous. Okay? Hundreds of examples of papyrus. It was used extensively, especially where? Egypt. Okay? That's where it originates. It's formed from plants. It's called the papyrus sedge. You can actually buy one of these and plant it in your garden if you want to. And you can make paper out of it if you can figure out how they made it. But they made a lot of paper from this. And in a dry environment like Egypt, those papers are well preserved. Okay? Literally, I said hundreds, thousands of these have been found of all sorts and types. Some biblical, the vast majority not biblical. Okay? They're, again, just the records of ancient people going about and living their lives. We have an example in the book of 2 John, verse 12, of writing on papyrus. So it is referred to in the Bible, and the vast majority of our early copies of New Testament books are written on papyrus. Okay. All right. And we have animal skins also. Animal skins, a good example of those are the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay. Animal skins are also pretty long-lived if they're in the right environment. Okay. If they're in the wrong environment, they deteriorate quickly. So if you put them in a wet environment, what's going to happen to them? They're going to mold and disintegrate. The bugs are going to eat them, things like that. Papyrus, same thing. Take a piece of paper, stick it in a bottle of water. It's not going to be in real great shape. Okay, eventually. I mean, our paper today probably lasts a little bit longer because we have a different process of making it. But both of these are fairly perishable unless they're in the right environment. And by the way, papyrus, the vast majority of them that we have, come from Egypt, even though they were used everywhere. They come from Egypt because Egypt is a good environment for preserving them. The Dead Sea Scrolls, where are they found?
The Dead Sea.
Down near the Dead Sea, which is, how many of y'all been to the Dead Sea? Raise your hand. Stacy has, y'all have not been to Israel? Oh, I thought y'all had been to Israel. Okay. So Stacy's been to the Dead Sea. Was it like humid and tropical there with all sorts of plants and lush greenery?
Desert and stark, and the Dead Sea, you bob in.
Right.
because of the mineral content.
So a very dry environment, okay? And so the caves there that house the Dead Sea Scrolls were that kind of environment. And so they were preserved, thankfully for us. Animal skins are referred to in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 13. Another word that we use for animal skins would be parchment. Okay, parchment. All right, these are all different kinds of materials. All right, let's talk about some examples of these. This is the tomb at Ketef Hinnom. I got to pull up my notes real quick because I do have notes on these things. All right, so this is a scroll. The metal is silver. And you can see that it was indeed a scroll. And when you unravel a silver scroll, one that's very old, it's really hard to keep it from busting up. Okay, and so you see these cracks through it and things like that. This particular scroll is dated to about 650 BC. It is one of the oldest examples of written Old Testament text. There's a Bible verse on the silver scroll. It was probably designed to be some kind of an amulet, something to be worn to ward off evil. Okay? It's magic. Okay? Given the time period, 650 BC, we know that Judea, Ketef Hinnom tomb, we know that Judea is a lot of folks doing things that God's Word doesn't say is right. Okay? So we find things like that. Next photograph, these are the Lakish letters. Now these are replicas. Okay, they're not the originals. But they were written in about 586 BC. This is Hebrew script, okay, as it existed at that time. And you have examples of these. Again, what is that? What's it written on?
Shards.
It's written on pottery shards, so it's ostraka. They were originally made out of clay, but it's a vessel that then breaks. If you can kind of see there's a little bit of a roundness to it. So it broke. We write a letter. These particular letters are interesting because they are written from the commander of one military garrison to the commander of another military garrison as the Babylonians are knocking off garrison after garrison. 586 BC. What happens in 586 BC? What's the last big event in that year? Fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonians. Okay, and so Lachish was the second most important military installation in Judah, okay? And so there were letters were being written by the commander there and other commanders to let them know what's going on. And one of the things that's written in there, we can no longer see the signal fires of Azekah, which meant that Azekah had fallen. You can imagine what it was like for these guys as they're seeing outpost after outpost, getting closer and closer, falling to the Babylonians. And you know, you're next. All right. So those are the Lakish letters. We're going to finish these photos before we get to bell. If y'all need to leave, I understand. All right, so this is the Great Isaiah Scroll. It is a Dead Sea Scroll. Dates to about 125 BC. Written on animal skin. Okay? And when we say the Great Isaiah Scroll, that's exactly what it is. You see some parts that are missing, but it contains the majority of the book of Isaiah. Dates to 125 BC, before the time of Jesus. You want to see that? Got to go to Israel. Every once in a while, they let it out. We got to see it in Fort Worth about 10 years ago. The Southwest Baptist Theological Seminary had that one on display. It's impressive. By the way, you look at that writing. This is not a replica. If you can read ancient Hebrew, you can read that writing. It's very clear and legible on much of the scroll. Okay.
What size is that?
I want to say that the pages were about yay big. Okay? And it goes a long way. Oh, there goes our alarm system again. All right, one more photo. This is a papyrus sedge plant that you make papyrus from. This is what's called the Labors of Pericles. Papyrus, it dates to the 3rd century AD, and you can see that it's deteriorated some, but also very legible, and they even drew a picture. That's Greek mythology. All right. So, that's where we're going to finish for today. Right there, where it says papyrus and parchment leather are most significant for Bible studies, we're going to pick it up there Wednesday night. Thank you.